Hi, and welcome to Ivy English. I'm Karen.
And I'm Chris Gorski.
Today is April 11th, and we're on page 29 in your magazines. And today we're going to have a discussion about a very, very important athletic event that occurs at certain intervals of the year.
That's right. We're talking about the once every 4-year Olympics.
Our title is The Rebirth of the Modern Olympics. And this title reminds us that the Olympics started very, very long ago in Greece. That's sort of like the beginning of Western culture was mainly Greece.
Right.
But there was a big gap in between then and when we started up the Olympics. Again, we're going to learn about that today.
That's right. And the Olympics, truthfully, I rarely watch them much on TV. I'll catch a couple highlights. But as I've gotten older, I've cared more about them. When I was a younger person, I really had no time at all for them.
Because?
I just...
Not interested?
Well, no. I actually know why. I was thinking about this morning. The broadcasts when, from the 80s and 90s, they were slow because the Olympics has time. They need time to set up,
That's right.
preparation, et cetera, et cetera.
And you're impatient.
They didn't have the cameras between all the different events.
Yeah.
Now today, with the internet, it's like, okay, boring, next. Okay, boring, next. And maybe some people will not like that you can flip or you don't invest in a certain sport, but you have an opportunity to see all of these things and find the one that suits you.
Right.
And interestingly, diving caught me the last Summer Olympics. I was really fascinated by that. I don't know why I was especially interested in watching the diving, but I had suddenly gone from a man that never concerned myself about diving to, I know that was not good.
Is it because you see all that preparation before they finally jump?
Not even that. In fact,
No?
it was the quickness in between events that I appreciated. There weren't very long, boring periods between action.
Setup. Yeah.
Right.
There's something else that occurs to me right away when we talk about the Olympics, and that is cheating. Because whenever your goal is to win, some people will cheat. No matter what it is, if it's business, if you set your goal as I want to win, people are going to cheat. And I've had that experience with a student who went through the back door to get a better grade. I told him, no, you didn't earn a better grade. He went through the back door and pressured the university to raise his grade. And I thought, man, you really want to win.
Right. Yeah. I suppose that for the Olympics, especially in smaller sports, this is the highest level. And if you want to be at the highest level, you want to be number one. If you're at the Olympics, why not go for gold? And unfortunately, I think you're right, that encourages cheating. And there's always some scandals, I would say roughly every Olympics.
That's right. Because setting your goal as winning, you think that is, of course, what we want. No, your goal can be to get yourself into the best shape, prepare yourself as best you can, perform as well as you can for your own sake. You want to be really good. But it is not necessarily to win and conquer somebody else. That's when the problems start. Okay, our title again is The Rebirth of the Modern Olympics. The 1896 Summer Olympics, the first international Olympic Games in modern history, took place on April 6, 1896. Every 4 years since then, thousands of the world's greatest athletes have gathered together to compete in the ultimate sporting event. This 2-week sports festival now features over 100 events, and elite athletes spend years training for it. Fans from every corner of the globe will tune in to cheer on their home country heroes. Despite the fame of the recent Olympic Games, the current version of the event has humble origins.
The modern Olympic Games have their origins in the ancient Olympic Games, which were held in the Greek city-state of Elis. These games coincided with a religious festival honoring the Greek god Zeus and included foot races, wrestling, boxing, and chariot races. People from about 100 different Greek cities traveled to compete in the event. However, after well over 1,000 years, the ancient games were stopped by the Roman Emperor Theodosius in 393 CE as a way to prevent the spread of pagan religions.
Nearly 1,500 years later, the event was reborn in its modern form thanks mainly to one man's effort. In 1894, a member of French nobility named Pierre de Coubertin convinced 79 delegates at an international sports conference to bring back the Olympics. With this, the International Olympic Committee was formed, and the first modern games were scheduled for 1896 in the Greek capital of Athens.
The first Athens Olympics had just 280 participants from 13 countries. There were 43 events that included track and field, swimming, wrestling, cycling, and more. All the competitors were men, and a few tourists who happened to discover the event were even allowed to compete. Because of Pierre de Coubertin's great efforts, the Games eventually became the significant international event that it is today.
Back to the beginning. Our title again is The Rebirth of the Modern Olympics. So you should all know what the Olympics are. We've got this little game in our house now because we now have a toddler at home, and it is a ring toss game. So it's got a bunch of colored plastic circles. So I think of the Olympics almost every day now.
Yeah, you see those little colored rings, right?
That's right.
I should have thought to kind of research the history behind that graphic design. It's a little simplistic, I think.
Yeah. But
it pays its purpose. It's very iconic.
It sure makes you think of the Olympics. So I think of the Olympics every day now. We've lost one of them, so it's a little less representative. But in any case, it's very distinctive. When you see those rings, you think of the Olympics. And rebirth. Birth is, of course, the process of a person being born, coming into the world. Rebirth is to be born again. That means something or someone was born once, but they're being born again. This is often used in religion. For example, in Christianity, they have this notion of a reborn Christian, a born-again Christian. That means that you were Christian maybe when you were young, but you didn't pay much attention to it, didn't think it was that important. But then you went through a lot of troubles, and then you rediscovered your faith. Then you are a born-again Christian, which is about the same idea as rebirth. You're being born again. It doesn't mean that you actually go through physical birth again, but something has changed, so you are even more committed to something than you were before. Okay, so that's the title, The Rebirth of the Modern Olympics. It tells us that they started a long time ago, then they stopped happening, but then they started up again. And this tells you how this happened. So our first paragraph, the 1896 Summer Olympics, the first international Olympic Games in modern history, took place on April 6th, 1896. Now, it's a little repetitive because we hear the year 1896 twice, but we need to make it clear that it was in the summer, and they had a name. The 1896 Summer Olympics, it's all capitalized, so it's part of a proper noun, a name. So we need to include the year there. But we have a little more detailed information. Happened on April 6th.
Also, we have a small note about Olympics. When we're talking about the games, they're always plural, but we do have that adjective form in this sentence, the first international Olympic Games. Be careful there. It's a small note that students sometimes will trip up on.
That's right. The adjective form doesn't have the S on it. Next sentence, every 4 years since then, thousands of the world's greatest athletes have gathered together to compete in the ultimate sporting event. And I think that really sums up the whole thing very neatly in one sentence, the ultimate sporting event. And sometimes I wondered about that because they don't allow professional athletes to participate in the Olympics. How can they call it the ultimate sporting event when people who are athletes for a living cannot participate?
This is something I often hear as a criticism of American football after the Super Bowl. They're the world champion football team. Well, it's only played in America. How could they be the world's best?
That's a good point, too.
But I do counter. Do you guys really think you could beat this team in football?
So why even bother?
Right. So, I mean, you're welcome to join the NFL. But yeah, so fair enough.
But can you address this? Why is it that they don't allow professional athletes to participate?
Well, they do to a certain extent. You have, especially like in hockey and especially in basketball. I mean,
For
the dream
some
team.
team sports, yes.
Right. So
yeah.
I think that there's a certain amount of flexibility depending how large the sport is. I don't know the actual rule, but Michael Jordan, probably the best basketball player that has ever lived, maybe next to LeBron James. I mean, he was famous for the 1992 Dream Team. He was iconic on that. In fact, it was made exclusively almost of NBA players for the American team. Those guys are professionals. So I suppose there's a certain amount of flexibility, but I do know that most professional athletes won't give up their professional time to play in the Olympics because they make far more money in the NBA.
Oh, I see. Yeah, that makes sense. But for individual athletes, they have to just kind of be doing it part-time on their own.
Yeah, a lot of them are sponsored by their own country's government because there's a lot of glory that comes from that. Especially wealthy countries will pay for certain athletes to just compete for the Olympics. This is your job. We'll pay you. You have to do the best you can. With a poorer country, it's a lot more challenging.
Ultimate means it is the greatest, the highest, the most impressive, the most important. Okay, so our next sentence, this 2-week sports festival now features over 100 events, and elite athletes spend years training for it. So I just imagine when I read this, the disappointment if you don't get a medal after all that you have dedicated to preparing for the Olympics.
I think silver is the ultimate disappointment,
That's
I would
right.
argue, for a lot of these people because the margin between first and second is usually
small.
tiny. It's infinitesimal. And just one different thing you could have done. And, you
would have gotten the gold.
That's right.
But why is bronze less disappointing? You're thinking, oh my gosh, I got a medal at all.
That's right. I'm on the podium.
That's right. Okay, so these people dedicate a lot of their lives to it, and they have to prepare themselves at the same time for the possibility that they may never get a medal for all of that work. Fans from every corner of the globe will tune in to cheer on their home country heroes. Now, do we always cheer on our home country? Your home country doesn't necessarily participate in all of the events.
I mean, most countries do. You're pretty hard-pressed to find many countries, or at least a region that doesn't participate. I suppose it's like this with some sports teams. There's no basketball team from where I'm from, so I pick a different basketball team. It's okay. I think most fans cope with that.
Okay. All right. So what you really want to do is cheer on for the people representing your own country. In the end, sports is really an ego thing because you feel like you personally have won if the person representing your country has won.
Yes, this is a thing that I really hate.
But it's true.
This is such a soapbox position. But when your team is doing well, you're like, we did.
We.
And then when they lost, those guys are terrible. Yeah. You guys got it. Listen, we have to own the position. It's okay to say we lost. That's okay. Sports fans are so bad about this. I listen to sports radio, and God, I hate that.
It's human nature. I think it's just the way we are as humans. Whenever we're doing well, we want the credit. When things aren't going well, that has nothing to do with me.
Blame.
That's the way we are. Okay, so tune in, that means you're watching. And now it's often over the internet. Every corner of the globe sounds kind of odd because a globe is round. How can it have corners? It just means every part of the world. And to cheer on, note the use of on. To cheer on, that means to encourage them to keep on working hard and doing well. Okay, our last sentence of the paragraph. Despite the fame of the recent Olympic Games, the current version of the event has humble origins. And this sentence, I think, is a good end of the first paragraph that will make us curious about the second paragraph. Because you think that the Olympic Games are anything but humble. They are really, really big and showy. But they didn't start out that way.
So let's continue to paragraph 2 and learn about these humble origins. The modern Olympic Games have their origins in the ancient Olympic Games, which were held in the Greek city-state of Elis.
And that is interesting because everybody pretty much knows that the Olympics started in Greece, but I don't think I had ever heard of Elis before this.
So a city-state is a pretty key word if you're learning Greek history. So state here really means like a country. Every individual city was its own little tiny government, and these cities or mini countries would often fight with each other. This is why you're going to see this city-state hyphenated. It's a special term. If you do any kind of research into Greek history, you're going to come across this term a lot. So please pay attention to it.
It is so similar to the idea of a state in ancient China because recently I have been reading the Spring and Autumn Animals and the Zuo commentary, and it's exactly as you describe. There are larger countries, medium countries, smaller countries, constantly at war with each other, constantly fighting each other. Everybody wants to be the big one dominating everybody else, but in fact, this was also true of Europe in general as well, like in Germany.
So let's go to our next sentence. These games coincided with a religious festival honoring the Greek god Zeus and included foot races, wrestling, boxing, and chariot races.
All right, so Zeus was the top god of ancient Greece. You should know about him. He was also called Jupiter in Rome later on. And this lists some of the events that they had in the original Olympics. Some of them we still have. Which ones do we still have?
Well, we still definitely have foot races, although we wear shoes today and we wear clothes.
That's a good point.
And we used to have professional boxing. Well, I don't think we have that anymore. Wrestling is definitely out, but the Greeks had this fun version of wrestling and boxing together called pancration, where, you could do almost anything. There's this famous Greek guy. He's so good. He was so famous for breaking the fingers of his opponents. See, he'd grab your hand, break your fingers.
Oh, no, and then you can't fight.
You can't do anything. So
that's awful.
He'd break your fingers. Can you imagine fighting that guy?
You've got to have rules.
Yeah, that's terrible.
Okay, and chariot races we no longer have either, but now we have sled racing.
Yeah, so chariot is a thing you ride in behind a horse. It sounds like the word chair because you're really standing behind it, but you could put a chair there.
Okay, our next sentence.
People from about 100 different Greek cities traveled to compete in the event.
So at the time, it was just Greece, but now it has expanded to the whole world.
And these were very serious. Even during times of war with the Persians, you would still have the Greek Olympics. These were serious business.
Wow.
However, after well over 1,000 years, the ancient games were stopped by the Roman Emperor Theodosius in 393 CE as a way to prevent the spread of pagan religions.
At the time, religion was a big thing. Now, a lot of people were keeping the old ways and worshiping the old gods, but then there were emperors and other people in power who were trying to spread Christianity, and that was a real fight to the death.
Yeah, Theodosius was the last Roman emperor to rule over the unified Rome before it gets split in half when you have the eastern and western parts, and he was way big into Christianity. So the idea of these games that came from a place that honored Zeus obviously is a big no-no for him. And so he's like, time to end this.
Pagan, P-A-G-A-N, that means people who did not accept Christianity. It was the original religions that they had before Christianity came into Europe. Next paragraph, nearly 1,500 years later, the event was reborn in its modern form, thanks mainly to one man's effort. Now that's a teaser if I've ever seen one. When you see that, it's because of this one guy that it changed. You want to know, who the heck was it? We find out in the next sentence. In 1894, a member of French nobility named Pierre de Coubertin convinced 79 delegates at an international sports conference to bring back the Olympics.
So a delegate is a word we especially like to use to talk about the people who vote for what are we doing in this current Olympics. Really, it means the word representative. You probably heard that more often, especially in relation to government.
Okay, our next sentence. With this, the International Olympic Committee was formed, and the first modern games were scheduled for 1896 in the Greek capital of Athens. So they got things together in just 2 years, and then they picked the place of the original Olympics to hold the Olympics.
So Pierre de Coubertin was really into the Olympic Games for a historical reason, but he also had a very practical reason. He was French, and the French were embarrassed in the Franco-Prussian War. Totally embarrassed. And he thought it was because French men had become too soft. They were learning these arts that weren't really preparing them to be physically strong. And
like literature and art.
Right,
painting.
But he was a scholar himself. He was an aristocrat scholar, but he thought taking care of your body was also important. He thought that if men were interested in exercise and maintaining their body, they would make better soldiers, and what better way to encourage that than through the Olympic Games?
Okay, our last paragraph.
The first Athens Olympics had just 280 participants from 13 countries.
Note the word just. Just means only. For the very first time? That's a lot of people in a lot of countries. That's very impressive, in my opinion.
So there was actually a different, quote-unquote, country that participated. It was called ZZX. And they use this for mixed countries. Maybe they didn't have enough people to form a whole team. This was especially common like in tennis, where you might have like a French and a German guy team up. And this was called ZZX just to encourage more people. Our next sentence begins. There were 43 events that included track and field, swimming, wrestling, cycling, and more.
So we've already commented on which events we still have and which we don't. They definitely have track and field. We have swimming. We have cycling, I believe. Do we have cycling?
Yes. Let's continue. All the competitors were men. And if you tourists who happened to discover the event were even allowed to compete. I love this.
I do too. You just happen to be traveling in Greece. I go, oh my gosh, look at those games. That's interesting. Hey, you want to join us?
It's like, let's go. This actually happened with a discus thrower. There was an American, and he was there for the shot put. And the night before, he's like, hey, can I throw the discus? And they're like, oh, yeah, why not? And then he upset everybody by winning the gold. He had never thrown discus in his life. The next day, he takes the first gold.
What a shock. But that's a great story.
It's unbelievable. Okay, let's look at our final sentence today. Because of Pierre de Coubertin's great efforts, the Games eventually became the significant international event that it is today. All right, let's share a little story before we're done here. So just like today's modern Olympic Games, the first ones cost a lot of money. And of course, it ran over budget. In fact, Coubertin's budget was overrun by, it was 3 times more expensive than he planned.
Oh, boy.
Now, some people think that the Olympic Games, in fact, will bring your city a lot of money, but not so. Montreal won the rights to host the 1976 Games, but they didn't pay off the debt for the Games until 2006.
Good heavens.
I don't know why some countries want this. I'm a little confused and conflicted by it.
Number 1, prestige and attention. And I think also some people want to invest in urban renewal. They want some fancy new buildings.
Some fancy. Yeah, I guess we went through this recently with FIFA. They built all this fancy stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's ego. I think ego, you hit it.
That's what it comes down to in many cases for many things. That's all we have time for today. Tune in next time. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.